Hello, everybody. It's Wendy Conrad, work culture strategist, certified chief happiness officer, and founder of Your Happy Workplace. And today, yes, we're talking about emotional intelligence with my friend, the amazing Maureen Ake, to the stage. Maureen Ake to the stage. There she is!
Hello!
Hello and welcome again. So good to have you, Maureen. Let me intro you. Maureen Ake, licensed marriage and family therapist, master's degree in marriage and family therapy from Nova Southeastern here in Florida. Transformation life coach certification, and started the Stuart Center for Couples and Families in 2018 here in beautiful downtown Stuart. Welcome, Maureen. And today we are talking about emotional intelligence. What is it? How does it affect how we work? And I'm going to tell you a couple of stories that kind of brought this on. And then we'll get deep into it. So I've been talking to a couple, I talk to people all the time, and talking to a couple people the past week. And one person told me the place that she works, someone who is a department head, when the department head has a bad day, everybody has a bad day. Yeah. And so people know that when this department head is in a bad mood, they kind of know, they need to walk on eggshells that day. So that was one example. And then another person was describing her workplace and saying that because her boss's spouse would not allow them to work at home because the spouse didn't want them there, that nobody could work from home.
Wow.
Even though they can do their jobs perfectly fine remotely. So this kind of got me to thinking, how are these people getting in leadership roles? And I guess the traditional trajectory is kind of, you have an entry-level job, you work there for a few years, you kind of go up the ranks, and the natural progression is, well, you've been here the longest, so you're up next.
Right.
When I think it's obvious from the stories that I'm hearing, that should not be the only indicator. So that leads us to emotional intelligence. Maureen, tell us what all us lay people, what that is.
Well, emotional intelligence is being conscious of how you feel and how other people feel and how that interconnection works. So it's really, if you break it down, it's the ability to identify your emotions, the ability to harness those emotions and be able to approach them. Am I staticky?
No, you're coming in fine.
All right. And the ability to approach those emotions with problem solving skills and understanding like how this affects you. And it's the ability to manage all of that together. Yes. So regulating your emotions and being aware of how that interchange affects if we're talking about work, how that interchange affects your employees and your company, and then also how emotional intelligence when it's applied to relationships as well, right?
Yes, yes. And I think a huge part, these are the kinds of things that when we're thinking about hiring somebody or promoting somebody, should, to me, be at the forefront versus skills that you can teach somebody. Because from what I've read, emotional intelligence can be improved upon, but a lot of it comes from your personality, your nature versus nurture, what kind of childhood you've had and what kind of upbringing you've had, and that all of that kind of stuff. So how do you feel about what kind of weight this kind of thing should have in the workplace, and how, maybe we should view it a little bit differently?
Well, I think that, number one, emotional intelligence is called a soft skill, which kind of upsets me because to me, it's it's
Makes it
a
seem less than.
it makes it seem less than, right? When we use the word soft, it's kind of a diminutive term. So I would like it to be put to the forefront to say it's a necessary skill. It's a highly important one. And when you ask, what do I think about it and how should it be applied in the workplace? That's the question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think number one, every company should uh, have this within their framework. I think that, I wrote this and I wrote in some of my notes that how do we implement emotional intelligence? I don't know if you want me to go there yet.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, but we need to start at the beginning, right? So it's starting at the beginning with the job description. When you are an employer or it's your company description or it's a job description that you're seeking these kinds of people or you're seeking a person who is emotionally intelligent, right? Highlight the company's policy regarding emotional intelligence. In the hiring process, you discuss the importance of emotional intelligence. If the company does not have it, we need to begin to implement it, right? So say you are, your happy workplace branches out and you have more and more staff underneath you. You're sharing your business plan with them, right? You're telling them that this is who we are now. Maybe it wasn't like this in the past, but this is who we are now. Mm. And if this is what you really want, it's a non-negotiable if this is your business then, right? Because if you bring this to your team, your crew, and you say, all right, guys, we're going to implement the importance of emotional intelligence, and someone's like, that's stupid. Screw that, yeah. Right? I'm not going to do that. And then you can say, well, then there's not a place here for you because this is what we're really going to grab into, right? We need to make room for that availability. So if people don't want that, then that says more about them than you.
Yeah, and I think that those kinds of shifts in our mindset about what makes for a good employee, and what the traditional workplace looks like. And I think we've talked about this in the past. I think the pandemic is kind of bringing these kinds of things to the forefront. Who are you as a human being versus right. What degree you have?
Yeah.
is something that people need to take a closer look at and kind of value more. You talk about, here's what we value and those kinds of things. So people I'm going to talk a little bit about a few things about how people with high IQ might exhibit in the workplace and low IQ. And I don't want to say IQ, EQ.
EQ.
That's what they call it, EQ. How that shows up in the workplace and how we can recognize it. And then you can kind of add in some other things.
Sure.
So somebody with a high IQ, it really affects how we make our decisions. And I'll let you elaborate on that. You can keep cool under pressure. You're good at resolving conflicts. Somebody with low EQ might play the role of the victim. I'm sure we've all seen that person in the workplace. Passive aggressive behavior, refusal to work as a team.
Yeah.
And may dismiss others' opinions. So what are some other ways people who have a high EQ and low EQ might exhibit in the workplace?
People with high emotional intelligence are able to differentiate their feelings from the problems that exist within the workplace, right? So if we are triggered by an experience or if we're triggered by something that's going on, I used to work in the restaurant industry, and girl, let me tell you, there is a different problem.
Yes.
There is a different problem every day of the week that people bring in, right? And they don't differentiate. And so therefore, table 5 is not going to get their ketchup and condiments because girlfriend over here had a domestic issue right. and is ticked off at her boyfriend, right? So that server is not able to differentiate between her family life and say, okay, that was a tough day that I had. I'm really upset about it, and I can still do my work, right? So there's a little differentiation between emotional stability and performance. So that's number 1. Number 2, there's also high chance of defensiveness, right? When there is a low emotional intelligence. When there's low emotional intelligence, what I mean by high defensiveness, like it's what you said about but being in that victim mode, like, well, why would I do, or why are you doing that to me? Well, I didn't do that. That's wrong, right? So it's not being able to take accountability and say, you're right, I didn't give that to you at 12 noon. I'm sorry. Here's still the work that I gave. Can we make it work, right? It's being able to differentiate. These are my emotions. I understand that you're having emotions about my lateness. I'm sorry. I get that feeling, right? So empathy is a huge factor in emotional intelligence, understanding someone else's point of view and understanding how your work performance can truly affect other people and your
Yes.
emotions.
Yes. I love all of that and I have so much to say. So here I go.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I love what you said about, bringing your drama to work, which is different than bringing your humanity to work.
Yes.
So, because I talk a lot about, we can't turn off our humanity as soon as we start our workday. But humanity doesn't mean, oh, I had a bad breakup yesterday, so I'm just going to be a puddle of tears on the ground and,
Mm-hmm.
I'm bringing my humanity to work. No, that's not what that means. So somebody with high emotional intelligence will, yes, I acknowledge, and if you're in a leadership role saying, I get that you've had this breakup, what can I do to help you, to support
Mm-hmm.
you? So there's kind of a fine line between drama and allowing your team to be
Right.
human. And
Right. In
yeah,
that, like, there's a difference between allowing the behavior to happen through like it's my excuse, I get to do whatever I want, and then taking responsibility for it. Just even if you are an employee and you had a bad breakup, right? It's also your responsibility to maybe talk to your employer or talk to your manager and say, I'm having a really bad day. Is there a way in which maybe I can shift my responsibility to not be in front of clients today, right? To be
yes.
emotionally aware enough to say, I know that I am still so triggered or activated in my own emotions that I am not going to be beneficial.
Yeah, and that takes emotional intelligence on leadership's part and the team members' part.
Yes.
So, something else that you said made me think of this, and that is, I think leaders kind of feel a sort of pressure to have all the answers and do
Mm-hmm.
everything right all the time. But part of having a high emotional intelligence is being able to say, look, I made this mistake. I apologize, and here's how we're going to move forward. So
Yeah.
that's an important piece on a leadership's role and team members' role to, have that accountability and be responsible. And I want to bring up self-awareness because
Do,
that
do,
I feel,
do.
yeah, I feel like that is the
Mm-hmm.
core of um, emotional intelligence. So talk a little bit about
Yes.
self-awareness and how that relates to our work selves.
So when we talk about awareness, there's four core um, aspects or four pieces of this pie of awareness. It's self-awareness and social awareness, self-management and social management,
Mm.
right? So we are able, when we have these capabilities or when we hone in on being self-aware, that means that we are able to feel our feelings and be able to manage those feelings. When we have social awareness, we are aware that, okay, Bonnie is triggered. Chris is, aloof. He's not paying attention. So we have these social awarenesses, right? So self-management, that's how I manage my feelings. Social management, if you're a leader, who am I talking with today? How am I helping them be the best employee that they can be, the best person that they can be? Hey, Chris, I've noticed that things have been a little off with you lately, or that you've just seemed kind of not participatory. Are there things that we can talk about, or is there something that we can work on in order for you to feel more involved? Right?
Mm.
So it's that social management. I am managing this exterior relationship because it affects my business.
Yes, yes. And I think that's so important to have these conversations and normalize because, our emotions and our humanity, it's part of who we are. And I think the mindset in the past has been that we're supposed to deny those parts of ourselves because they're unprofessional. And
Right?
so this is just another part of being human. And
Mm-hmm.
so to acknowledge that in the workplace and to start having these conversations about our emotions because it affects how we work. So when you kind of pretend like you don't have emotions or that emotions are unprofessional in the workplace, that's where you kind of create a whole subset of problems
Yeah, that's
that,
where you create friction. That's where
yeah.
friction occurs. And there's also, those types of people of like grin and bear it, like I'll get through
Mm,
it. I'm fine. I can muscle through this. And that kind of behavior is also you're not managing your own self-awareness. You're realizing that you're having a hard time, and you're putting pressure on the system to make it work, when in reality it's not going to work. It's not going to work in an effective way, because again, more friction into the whole system.
Yeah.
So it's just,
And I think part of the awareness and the empathy piece is also to recognize that not everybody processes emotions in the same way.
yes.
So, talk a little bit about how maybe a leader can navigate that part of it.
So that's the social awareness part, right? So there's self-awareness and there's social awareness. When you see one of your team members that might be off a little bit, or they're not acting like their normal self, I would bring them into the office and say, and I think that we've talked about this before, you acknowledge 3 to 5 things that are visible or vocal that have been going on. Like, hey Chris, I've noticed that you've been a little reserved recently, and you got off of work early the last few days and you haven't been eating lunch with everyone. I just want to sit down because I know that when I do stuff like that, there's typically something going on with me, right? So it's social awareness. I'm aware that something's going on with you, that you're presenting these things that are atypical, and then I'm relating it back to myself, right? So that's creating that empathy model. Like I know when there's something wrong with me, I also pull back, and then it's reaching back out to you. Is everything okay? Or how can I support you right now? Right? So it's that back and forth of I see you. I understand how sometimes you might be, or I understand when I do this. Is that same way for you? So it's that social aware.
Yeah, and I think I've talked about this in the past too, and we probably have also. When you're doing regular check-ins with your people just on a regular basis, without there having to be something wrong per se, that makes these kinds of conversations so much more, so much
Easy.
easier to have. And when you have that kind of relationship with your team, it's not unprofessional. It's
No.
necessary because your team are bringing their whole selves to work, and part of that includes emotions.
So,
So yeah.
like my husband, he shared with me last night, he's like, something happened last week in one of our meetings and I got a little triggered, and, it affected my day for the next day or two. He's like, but we had our meeting again. This was last night. He's like, I had our meeting and I did a clearing and I shared with them what was going on. And everyone's like, okay, great, let's move on. And so it causes so much less friction. And that's just him right there. They have such a great work environment that they're able to have that clearing, have that sharing, and move forward instead of building those tiny layers of resentments and angers. And I wrote in this that when we have more emotional intelligence, it reduces the amount of assumptions and projections. And it's really, really important to note that.
Yes. And I think too, I've been in work environments before where they're like, no drama, da 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 da, which, if you want to create these kind of environments, it almost goes against what our brain is telling us to do. So you
Right.
don't want drama, so you're trying to stop it. You're trying to get people to not but if you're creating these kind of environments where you're talking about things and things are out in the open, then that is what's going to lessen the drama.
Yeah. Yeah.
No more drama.
It creates so much less friction when there's constant connection.
Yes, yes,
And I think that
yes.
people are afraid of that. Many people have not been modeled emotional intelligence. Many people have not been modeled the language of emotion. So, right, it's like sad, happy, mad. Those are the go-to feelings, as opposed to I feel really uncomfortable. I feel reserved. I feel anxious, right? So it's about stepping into that language and that field of um, emotional cues, emotional feelings, right? And a lot of people just don't have that.
What would you say to someone who works in an environment where there's a lot of men? Maybe it's a male dominated
Mhm.
industry. What would you say to somebody in a leadership role there who wants to cultivate these kinds of environments, but is having a hard time getting the male energy on board with this soft skill, so we say, because I think these kinds of things are seen as feminine energy and sometimes negatively as being weak.
Yeah.
So what kind of advice would you give somebody in a leadership role who's in a male-dominated work culture?
I think that that's a great question, Wendy. I think that we can see how the masculine has been described as strong and without emotion, and that's a rule, right? That's a bullshit rule. Pardon my
Yeah,
language.
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
bullshit. It's a
I
bullshit
love
rule.
cursing here on the live.
Sorry. It's a crappy rule that we don't need to adhere to anymore. And so if there are men in business and if there are women in business who have more men in their business, I think it's important to just continue to model over and over. It's something to talk about. I also wrote in some of my notes here, what are some ways that, emotional intelligence is like a muscle and it needs to be flexed often. And so the more we do it in male dominated work cultures or female dominated work cultures, because also females have this very double-edged sword, right? We are told that we're soft, we're told that we're demure, we're told all of these things, and then we're told like we need to be hard, we need to be strong, we need to be all of these things. So it's these
Yeah.
mixed messages that we're receiving, and then it's like, oh crap, if I'm supposed to be strong, am I not supposed to show emotion? Am I not supposed to be able to express? So by modeling these things, and I would stress for employers and business owners, there are so many certifications online, it's not even funny. Um, Managers, employers, employees. So Harvard and Cornell both have online universities. They both have classes, CEUs, that you can get in emotional intelligence. Yes.
Love
So go
that.
ahead, yeah, look it up online. And so if you want to get like a big, have that on your resume that we are emotionally intelligent certified, great. Harvard and Cornell are the places for you. Smaller companies also though provide that, and that's really important. So as a business owner, you can invest in that in your employees. Quarterly meetings is something that I would suggest for staff, for all management, to continue to, how are you checking in with your employees? How are you doing this, right? Where are we on this? How are you continuing to connect to everyone in the business? Monthly strategy meetings, weekly check-ins, and creating that culture. So it starts at the top. This is our business model, and it works its way down. So if it's a male-dominated culture, if it's a female-dominated culture, it's taking that identity of emotion as female and creating that emotion as human. And we have shared experiences. And, the older I get, the more I see and the more I notice that men in my age bracket are becoming much more emotionally aware, much more emotionally intelligent. And maybe it's a softening or maybe it's a reduction of the outside pressures. I don't know, but I think it's so beautiful. And I don't think that it's weak for men to show emotion. I think it's human.
I would argue that it's the strong people who are willing to do it because can be so scary.
Yes.
Who the strong people who are willing to risk the kind of masculine
Persona, mask, shadow. Yeah.
persona, the toxic masculinity that exists in our society and go against that and say,
Mhm.
I don't give a fuck. Here's how
Yeah.
I feel.
Yeah.
And that's all part of the self-awareness part.
Yeah.
And I love those tips you have for increasing emotional intelligence amongst your team. And I'm going to share a couple of tips for doing it just as a human being. And if you're in a
Yeah.
leadership role, I think this is so important. And then I'll have you add any that you have. But
Yeah.
I think journaling is a great way to kind of get in touch with your feelings and just be aware of them. I know for me, when I write stuff down, stuff comes out that I didn't even know was in there.
Hmm.
So that's a great way. Finding ways to manage your stress, and we've talked about self-care in the past, and being aware of when you're stressed and having like a kind of arsenal of things. Okay, I know I'm stressed right now. here's a list I can go to of things I can do to kind of manage that. Practice active listening. We talk about communication all the time, and people always are talking about how they say things and that, but they're forgetting about the listening piece, which I think is probably the most important piece that gets ignored. So what are some other ways that we, just as humans, can improve our emotional intelligence?
I think it's practicing empathy. So when someone is able to share with you a feeling, before you go into a response to fix it, number one, no one wants it to be fixed. They just want to be heard. Okay. So when we are being an active listener and someone says, I feel really hurt, it's important for the listener to dig into themselves to think, what does being hurt feel like for me? Right. So it's by practicing that reflection of what does that feel like? Ooh, I don't like that feeling. They must be feeling pretty crappy. Right. And so I'm sorry that you feel that way. I understand what it's like to be hurt, right? So it's practicing that empathy over and over. And again, I would also talk about learning the language of emotions, that really deepening. If you have a journal, I've got 75 different journals. I've got work journals, I've got personal journals, I've got poetry journals, I've got lots of journals because I love writing and I love getting it out. And if you're not sure what to write, I would do a verbal explosion on the page of whatever feeling that you're feeling.
I love that and then, visual.
Yeah. I used to call it something else, but it seemed kind of gross. So
I know what you're thinking.
It's a mental explosion on the page. And so you write down all of the feelings. And then you go into those feelings. Like, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling that way? Or what brings me to feel angry, right? Anger is a secondary emotion because it's a reaction to something, right? So we typically feel angry when there's an injustice or a hurt that's been done. So we've got to go to the root of those feelings to say, ooh, I just feel invalidated, and that's why I'm reacting in anger, right? So it's about really dipping into those smaller, like it's almost like the fascia, right, that we have in our muscle system. It's like digging in more and more and more to why we feel those feelings. So when we are an active listener, it's really important to dig into there. And when we are communicating, it's highly important that we're able to connect to what we're thinking. So if it says, okay, can you give me a moment? Like, let me try and feel what's going on for me, or I'm trying to digest that. Can you give me a moment? And that's okay. So the more that you're able to dig and to become aware and to increase your mindfulness, right? So I'm aware that I'm being triggered because of my issues with these things, and how I'm going to react is up to me, right? I can't change that trigger quite yet, but I can change how I respond to it.
I love that, giving yourself a moment to digest, because I'm one of those people who likes to simmer in things. So if I hear somebody say something that's impactful, it takes me a minute to kind of process it. And I think a big part of active listening is kind of training our brains to decenter ourselves. Like, I know for me, that's a practice I constantly struggle with, is, not thinking about how does, when somebody tells me something and I immediately react by wanting to fix it, that's because what they're saying makes me feel uncomfortable, makes me not want, uncomfortable with their pain. And so I want to fix it so I don't have to deal with it anymore. Or thinking about what I'm going to be saying next versus putting the other, you're listening to the other person. So that takes practice. It's not something that happens overnight. So, and is a big part of emotional intelligence for sure.
That's a really important thing to bring up, especially, I know you're about to say something.
No, go ahead.
But it's
I'm always about to say something.
It's a really important thing to be able to be aware as to what you're hearing versus what's going on in the filter in your head, right? So if I tell you, Wendy, I'm really upset, you might be filtering, uh-oh, she's upset with me. What have I done? Right? So it's really important that we can differentiate between my feelings and your responsibility of my feelings, right?
Yes.
And especially,
go ahead.
Sorry. And especially if we're already in an emotional state, if we're already heightened, it's very challenging to get back because we're already emotionally flooded. We can see this with parents who yell at their kids when their kids are just like, mama, mama, mama. What do you want? It's like, right? Mama has probably already done 15 loads of laundry, has already worked from home, has already done all of these things, and is already full, right? And so needs to decompress before just responding to their child. It's all of those things, and we can see that at work all the time too.
Yes, I feel like we could talk about this for days, but I love that we're talking about emotions in the workplace. I feel like it's the same kind of reaction that I get when I talk about happiness in the workplace. People are like, what? That doesn't belong in the workplace. So I feel like we need to have this conversation over and over and over again. I feel like we're going to have emotional intelligence part 2 because I think it's definitely necessary.
There's so much that we can continue to talk about.
Yes. Any last tips or suggestions for emotional intelligence in the workplace, and or anything you have coming up that you want to share with people?
I would, if I were an employer or an employee or just a single business person like myself, I would read The Four Agreements. It's a really simple book by Don Miguel Ruiz, and it has to do with just being responsible for yourself. And once you are responsible for yourself, you can create that initiative to be more self-aware, to be more socially aware, right? To be self-managed and to socially manage. You don't always have to be the center of attention. You don't always have to be the fix-it. Why would you say that?
How dare you, Maureen?
But that's a really great, super easy book, like 90-something pages, The Four Agreements, that to just continue to do the work and to be accountable for the work every day, right? I wake up sometimes and I don't want to exercise, but it's like my main thing to do, and it keeps me accountable for everything else that I've got going on in my life. And it's the same thing when, keep accountability for doing the work that you do or doing anything. You got to keep yourself accountable. If you're not in accountability, where are you?
Yes. I love that you're recommending The Four Agreements as a book to help you be a better leader. That I think is super impactful. The Four Agreements is a great book. Go check it out. Tell people where they can find you, Maureen.
They can find me.
Talk about your From the Chair, because I love those.
Oh, okay, thanks. You can find me at the Stuart Center for Couples and Families. Licensed marriage and family therapist here. I see clients. I see individuals and couples, lots of families, things like that. It's fantastic. I'm doing a series on Instagram. It's called From the Chair, and it's like a weekly check-in about some of my topics that I think are important and think that people can listen to and maybe take some of that and implement it into their own world. And I'm also wrapping up my book. The book is completed, so now we're just working on the software. Yeah. Heart surgery in 21 weeks. That's the program. It's the book. So it's really exciting. It's just in the motion now for publishing and for the workbook, the interactive aspect of it. So
that's exciting. That's something to celebrate that it's done. Can't wait
until
that comes out. And I can't wait for your next From the Chair. That's some really great content that's also very shareable.
Thank you.
I am Wendy Conrad, work culture strategist, certified chief happiness officer, and founder of Your Happy Workplace. And if you jumped in halfway, go watch the replay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Maureen. We'll have you back, and we'll see you next time.
Wendy, thank you so much for having me today. It's always a pleasure.
You. Love you. Hugs.
Love you. Bye.